Something strange happens to men after 40. Women who once ignored them suddenly show interest. Messages come first. Conversations feel serious. Attention feels real. Most men think they finally became attractive. They didn't. What changed wasn't the man, it was time. And if you don't understand why this attention shows up now, you'll mistake urgency for desire and build a relationship on a misunderstanding that quietly destroys respect. This video isn't about blaming women. It's about seeing the truth most people never explain, and why late attention can be more dangerous than rejection ever was. Stay with me. Women don't suddenly want you because you became better. They want you because time changed what matters, and most men misunderstand that. If you don't see the difference, this attention will cost you more than it gives. Section 1. The pattern men are starting to notice. Something strange has been happening to a lot of men in their late 30s and 40s. Men who spent most of their adult life being ignored. Men who were never considered exciting, impressive, or special. Men who were always told they were nice, but never chosen. Now, out of nowhere, women are reaching out. Messages arrive first. Conversations feel warmer. Interest feels direct. Some women are suddenly open, flexible, and engaged in ways these men have never experienced before, and it's confusing. These men start asking themselves questions they've never asked before. Did I finally make it? Did I mature into my looks? Did my confidence finally show? Did women suddenly realize my value? It feels validating, almost surreal. For the first time, attention isn't scarce, it's consistent. But beneath that validation is a quiet discomfort, because deep down many of these men know something doesn't add up. They don't feel drastically different than they did 10 or 15 years ago. In fact, some feel less energetic, more worn down, more realistic about life. So why now? Why do women who once overlooked them suddenly want to talk, meet, and build something serious? This is where most explanations go wrong. People jump to easy answers. They say men age better. They say women get desperate. They say standards drop. Those explanations sound good, but they're incomplete. What's actually happening is more subtle, more psychological, and more uncomfortable to admit. This shift isn't about attraction suddenly increasing. It's not about glow-ups or hidden potential finally being discovered. It's about timing. It's about life phases colliding. It's about how priorities change when fantasy gives way to reality. And most importantly, it's about how attention and desire are not the same thing. Men are feeling chosen for the first time, but they don't yet understand why they're being chosen or what they represent in this stage of someone else's life. Until that distinction is clear, this new attention can feel empowering, while quietly setting the stage for confusion, resentment, and bad decisions. To understand what's really happening, you have to stop looking at yourself and start looking at how the entire dating environment shifts with age. That's where the real answer is. Section 2. Why men think they leveled up and why they didn't. When attention finally shows up, the mind looks for a flattering explanation. Men tell themselves a simple story: I must be better now. Maybe I grew into myself. Maybe women finally see what I always had. It's a comforting belief, and on the surface, it feels logical. After all, by 40, many men are more stable. They have careers, routines, emotional control, and life experience. Compared to their 20s, they feel calmer and more grounded. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of these men did not suddenly become more attractive in a traditional sense. They didn't gain height. They didn't gain youth. They didn't become more exciting, more adventurous, or more visually striking. In many cases, they actually became less appealing by surface-level standards. More stress, less energy, more responsibility, more routine. So if the man didn't dramatically improve, what changed? The answer is not found in the mirror. It's found in context. Attraction doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a moment in time, and time changes what people value. In your 20s, potential matters more than stability. Excitement matters more than predictability. Options feel endless, so filtering feels safe. In your 40s, the calculation changes. People don't suddenly want better. They want clearer. They want fewer unknowns, fewer risks, fewer emotional gambles. So when men mistake this shift for personal growth alone, they misunderstand the situation. They assume the desire is about them, when in reality it's about what they now represent. That distinction matters, because when you believe the attention exists because you finally became the guy, you may ignore the fact that the attraction is conditional, situational, and time-based. And when circumstances change again, that attention can disappear just as quietly as it arrived. Understanding this isn't about tearing men down. It's about keeping them grounded. Because confidence built on misunderstanding is fragile, and relationships built on illusion rarely hold up once reality settles in. The real shift isn't in men, it's in what women are optimizing for and why. Section 3. How women choose in their 20s versus after 40. In your 20s, choice feels theoretical. There's time to experiment, time to be wrong, time to chase feelings without consequences. Decisions don't feel permanent, so preferences lean toward what feels exciting in the moment. At that stage, attraction is often built around possibility. What could this become? Where might this lead? How does this make me feel right now? Uncertainty isn't a threat yet, it's part of the thrill. That's why traits like confidence, charisma, ambition, and status carry so much weight early on. Even if those traits aren't stable, they signal upward potential, and potential feels safe when time feels unlimited. But time changes how the brain evaluates risk. By 40, choices are no longer theoretical, they're practical. There's less patience for unpredictability, less tolerance for emotional chaos, less energy for relationships that require fixing, waiting, or hoping. Attraction doesn't disappear, but it becomes filtered through consequence. Instead of asking, is this exciting? The question becomes, is this sustainable? Instead of wondering, what if? The focus shifts to, what will this actually look like day to day? That's when average men re-enter the picture, not because they suddenly became irresistible, but because they represent something different now. Reliability, emotional steadiness, predictability, a lower likelihood of disruption. In earlier years, those traits felt boring. Later in life, they feel calming. This doesn't mean desire vanishes. It means desire becomes selective in a different way, less driven by image, more driven by outcome. The mistake men make is assuming this shift is about attraction catching up. It's not. It's about risk tolerance dropping. The qualities that were ignored before weren't invisible. They were simply undervalued at a time when consequences felt far away. Now that consequences are closer, the same traits carry a very different weight. And that change in weighting explains far more than ego, standards, or desperation ever could. Section 4. The role of time, not desperation. One of the biggest misunderstandings men have is believing this shift is driven by desperation. It's not. Desperation is emotional panic. What's happening here is time awareness. There's a difference. In earlier years, time feels abstract. 5 years feels distant. 10 years feels imaginary. Life seems adjustable, flexible, forgiving. But as people move into their late 30s and 40s, time becomes concrete. You feel it in routines, in energy levels, in the narrowing space between today and later. That awareness changes decision-making, not because someone is afraid, but because they finally understand trade-offs. Every choice now excludes something else. Every delay costs something real. Every relationship that doesn't move forward feels heavier than it used to. So when women over 40 show interest more directly, it's often not driven by emotion alone. It's driven by clarity. They know what didn't work, they know what drained them, they know which patterns led nowhere. That knowledge doesn't make them desperate, it makes them focused. The problem is that focus can feel intense to someone who isn't operating under the same time pressure. Men often misread urgency as passion. They assume seriousness means desire, but seriousness is often about efficiency, not chemistry. This is where confusion begins. A woman may want a relationship to move forward because she knows what she wants from life now. That doesn't automatically mean she feels a deeper attraction than she would have years ago. It means she's no longer interested in uncertainty. For men, this distinction matters, because when you confuse time-based urgency with emotional pull, you may feel chosen when you're actually being evaluated. That doesn't make the interest fake, but it does make it situational. And situational attraction behaves differently under pressure. Understanding this protects men from rushing into relationships they don't fully understand, and from taking urgency personally when it was never about them to begin with. Time changes priorities, not emotions, priorities. And that single difference explains more of this shift than most people are willing to admit. Section 5. Why average starts to look different. The word average carries the wrong meaning. Most people hear it and think unremarkable, forgettable, or uninspiring. But as life progresses, average quietly gets redefined. In your 20s, average feels replaceable. There are always more options, more chances, more excitement around the corner. By 40, average starts to signal something else. It signals consistency. An average man shows up when he says he will. He has a routine. He handles problems without drama. He doesn't need constant validation or chaos to feel alive. Earlier in life, those traits feel invisible because they don't create emotional spikes. They don't trigger adrenaline. They don't stand out in crowded rooms or dating apps. Later in life, those same traits reduce friction, and reduced friction becomes valuable when energy is limited. What changes isn't desire, it's tolerance for instability. At this stage, unpredictability isn't exciting, it's exhausting. So average men don't become more attractive, they become less costly, less emotional labor, less uncertainty, less recovery after things go wrong. That matters more than people admit. Life by 40 is already full. Work, family, health, responsibilities. Adding a relationship that increases stress feels like a bad investment. An average man who offers peace, reliability, and emotional safety starts to feel like relief, not compromise. This is where misunderstandings happen. Men think they're being chosen for who they are. Women think they're choosing wisely for their future. Both can be true, but only partially, because when attraction is driven by relief rather than desire, expectations quietly change. The relationship becomes about maintenance instead of excitement, about alignment instead of discovery. That can work, but it requires honesty. When average becomes valuable, it's because life has taught someone the cost of chasing intensity without stability. And that lesson doesn't automatically create deep attraction. It creates pragmatic appreciation. Understanding the difference helps men decide whether they want to be chosen for who they are or for what they help someone avoid. That distinction defines how the relationship will feel over time. Section 6. The uncomfortable truth about misaligned attraction. This is where things get uncomfortable, because not all attraction is aligned. There's a difference between wanting someone and accepting someone. One is emotional, the other is practical. When attraction and practicality point in the same direction, relationships feel natural. When they don't, tension quietly builds. In many late-stage relationships, attraction doesn't disappear, it shifts. It becomes quieter, more controlled, less instinctive. Desire exists, but it's filtered through caution, comparison, and past experience. That's where problems begin. A woman may choose a man because he fits the life she wants now, not because he sparks the feelings she once chased. She appreciates him, respects him, and trusts him, but part of her still remembers a different kind of excitement. That memory doesn't vanish just because priorities changed. Men often sense this without being able to name it. A lack of enthusiasm, subtle comparisons, a feeling of being good enough but never quite ideal. No one talks about this openly because it sounds cruel, but ignoring it doesn't make it go away. When attraction is slightly misaligned, it shows up indirectly, in dissatisfaction over small things, in emotional distance, in a quiet sense that something is missing, even when everything looks fine on paper. This doesn't mean the relationship is doomed, but it does mean it requires awareness. Men who believe they are finally being chosen for who they truly are may feel blindsided later when that subtle gap becomes visible. They wonder why appreciation doesn't feel like passion, or why stability doesn't translate into enthusiasm. The truth is simple, but uncomfortable. Not every relationship begins with desire as its foundation. Some begin with timing, logic, and necessity. Those relationships can still work, but only if both people understand what brought them together. When attraction is partially practical, expectations must be realistic, because if one person believes they were chosen out of deep desire, while the other chose out of alignment, resentment eventually finds a way in. Clarity early prevents confusion later, and clarity starts with recognizing that being chosen doesn't always mean being desired in the way you imagine. Section 7. Why some women rush and what it really means. One of the clearest signals men notice is speed. Things move fast, conversations turn serious early. Questions about commitment, timelines, and the future appear sooner than expected. For men who waited years to feel chosen, this intensity can feel flattering, but speed doesn't always mean connection. Often, it means compression. Life has already taught its lessons, and there's no interest in repeating them. The trial and error phase feels over. What once unfolded slowly now feels inefficient. This urgency isn't about controlling the man in front of her. It's about controlling outcomes. There's a strong desire to avoid wasting time on something that won't lead anywhere, so intentions get clarified quickly, expectations surface early, ambiguity is minimized. From the outside, this can look like pressure, and for men who aren't operating under the same timeline, it can feel overwhelming. Here's where misunderstanding happens. Men assume the rush exists because they are uniquely valuable, that the woman is afraid of losing them. In reality, she's afraid of losing time. Those are very different motivations. This doesn't make her dishonest, it makes her aware, but awareness can remove space for organic development. Relationships need room to breathe. When everything accelerates, people may commit before truly understanding compatibility. Issues that would normally surface slowly get postponed, not resolved. That's risky. Men who don't recognize this dynamic may feel swept into something they didn't fully choose. They go along with the pace because attention feels rare and resistance feels ungrateful. But speed should never replace clarity. If a relationship is moving quickly, the most important question isn't why me, it's why now. Understanding that difference allows men to slow things down without guilt, to observe behavior, not just words, to assess whether interest is based on genuine connection or situational urgency. Because when speed is driven by fear of running out of time, It creates pressure that love alone cannot sustain. Healthy relationships grow with intention, not urgency, and recognizing the source of that urgency is what protects both people from committing to something that feels right now, but wrong later. Section 8. The men who handle this well, and those who don't. This stage of life reveals a clear divide between men. Some men let the attention change them, others let it inform them. The men who struggle are usually the ones who waited a long time to feel wanted. When interest finally arrives, they attach meaning to it too quickly. They interpret attention as validation, and validation as proof of worth. So they rush back, they overlook misalignment, they ignore discomfort, they accept pressure they don't fully agree with. Not because the woman is manipulative, but because the man is relieved. Relief is dangerous. It lowers standards quietly. These men confuse being chosen with being compatible, and once that confusion sets in, they stop asking important questions. They assume this is their chance, and chances don't come often. The men who handle this phase well respond differently. They stay calm. They don't resist interest, but they don't inflate it either. They understand that attention at this stage often reflects timing, not transformation. So they observe. They notice how a woman talks about her past. They pay attention to whether curiosity feels genuine or evaluative. They watch how conflict is handled, not how affection is expressed. Most importantly, they don't rush to prove themselves. They don't overgive. They don't accelerate commitment to match someone else's timeline. They let things unfold at a pace that allows truth to surface. These men understand something critical. Being wanted late doesn't mean you must accept early. You're allowed to be selective now. You're allowed to take your time. You're allowed to decide whether the interest fits your life, not just your ego. The irony is that this grounded response often increases genuine attraction. Calm creates safety. Boundaries create respect. Men who treat this phase as a bonus instead of a rescue tend to build better outcomes because they're not reacting to attention. They're choosing consciously, slowly, and on their own terms. Section 9. Why some relationships work anyway. Despite all the complexity, some relationships that begin later in life genuinely work. They don't work because timing is perfect. They work because expectations are honest. In these relationships, neither person pretends the past didn't exist. There's no rewriting of history, no pretending that attraction appeared out of nowhere or that priorities never changed. Instead, there's clarity. The woman understands why she's choosing differently now. The man understands what he represents in her life and decides whether he's comfortable with that role. That mutual awareness changes everything. Attraction in these cases isn't driven by fantasy. It's built through shared values, emotional alignment, and respect that develops over time. Desire grows not from novelty, but from trust. These couples don't rush to lock things in. Even if timelines exist, they don't override compatibility. Conversations happen early, but decisions are made slowly. There's space for reality to show up. When conflict appears, it's addressed directly. Comparisons are acknowledged instead of denied. Expectations are adjusted instead of silently resented. That's the difference. Relationships fail when people pretend they're something they're not. They succeed when both people accept the actual foundation and build intentionally on top of it. Late-stage relationships also work when men don't confuse peace with boredom. Stability doesn't have to kill attraction if curiosity and respect are maintained. And women who succeed in these relationships don't view their partner as a consolation prize. They see him as a conscious choice, not the best remaining option, but the right one for who they've become. That distinction matters, because people can feel when they are chosen deliberately versus when they are selected by default. When both people are aligned in understanding why they're together, resentment has less room to grow. Timing may bring people together, but honesty is what keeps them there. And while late attraction often starts practically, it only survives when it evolves emotionally, through effort, self-awareness, and mutual responsibility. That's what separates relationships that merely happen from relationships that actually last. Section 10. What this shift teaches about modern dating. This shift isn't just about age. It's about how modern dating trains people to misunderstand value. Apps, social media, and endless choice create a distorted sense of reality. Attention feels like proof. Options feel permanent. Time feels expandable. For a long while, those illusions hold. Then life corrects them. Modern dating encourages optimization instead of connection. People filter for traits, numbers, and aesthetics without understanding how those preferences age. What feels essential at 25 can feel irrelevant at 40. The problem isn't wanting standards. The problem is assuming standards exist outside of time. Every preference has a shelf life. Every advantage fades or shifts. Every market corrects eventually. This isn't punishment, it's reality. What this phase reveals is how rarely people examine why they want what they want. Desire is often inherited from culture, peers and algorithms, not self-knowledge. So when circumstances change, people don't just adjust their choices, they adjust their stories. They say they evolved. They say they know better now. Sometimes that's true. Other times, it's just adaptation disguised as wisdom. For men, this moment exposes a different lesson. Validation delayed feels intoxicating, but attention gained through timing isn't the same as admiration earned through alignment. If you mistake one for the other, you risk building relationships on misunderstanding. Modern dating doesn't reward patience or reflection, it rewards speed, presentation and surface clarity. But long-term connection still depends on slower truths. Compatibility doesn't announce itself early, character reveals itself under pressure. Desire stabilizes only when expectations are realistic. This stage of dating strips away fantasy for everyone involved. It shows that attraction is contextual, that power shifts, that timing matters more than fairness. And once you see that clearly, dating becomes less emotional and more intentional. Not colder, just clearer. Clarity doesn't remove hope, it removes illusion. And in a dating culture built on illusion, that alone is a quiet advantage few people ever develop. Section 11. The final truth men need to hear. Here is the truth most men never hear clearly. Attention is not the same as desire. Interest is not the same as admiration. Being chosen is not the same as being wanted. When attention arrives later in life, it feels powerful because it was absent before. It fills a gap many men carried quietly for years. That makes it easy to assign meaning too quickly. But meaning should be examined, not assumed. Some women are drawn to men over 40 because those men feel safe, stable, and predictable. That can be a good thing, but safety is not passion, and stability is not attraction. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. Men need to know which one they're dealing with. You're allowed to ask yourself hard questions. Does this interest feel curious or evaluative? Does it feel chosen or settled for? Does it grow with time or does it rush past it? You don't owe anyone commitment because they showed up late. You don't owe gratitude for attention that arrives when circumstances change. And you don't owe your future to someone else's urgency. This phase of life gives men something they didn't have before: leverage, not to manipulate, not to retaliate, but to choose consciously. You can slow things down, you can observe patterns, you can decide whether the dynamic actually fits your life. Being alone is not failure. Being rushed is not love. Being chosen out of convenience is not victory. If you build something now, it should be because the connection feels mutual, grounded and respectful, not because attention finally arrived and you were afraid it might leave. The most dangerous mistake men make at this stage is thinking this is their only window. It's not. What's rare isn't attention. What's rare is alignment. And the moment you understand that difference, you stop reacting to interest and start choosing relationships that don't quietly cost you your peace. That awareness is the real advantage men gain with age. If this video made you see dating differently, you're exactly who Psycore is for. Subscribe, stay sharp, and don't chase validation. Understand the psychology before it controls you.